I'm Eric Chemi, and this is Politely Pushy. Welcome to the show. My guest today, Professor Luis Almeida. He's a professor of communications at Claflin University. Professor Almeida, or can I call you Luis for this episode? Thanks for coming on the show with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. Of course you can.
Well,
Absolutely.
I appreciate that. So you're in the teaching business about communications, right? So you're educating the future PR professionals, head of communications, future CMOs, spokespeople, writers, all of those types of folks are coming through you. You've been a professor at Claflin for not that long. You've been a professor at many other institutions. It's rare for me to see a professor who's bounced around. So tell me why you've actively sought out different jobs and different experiences as opposed to the ones I'm so familiar with. They've got a job and they'll stay there for 40 years.
Well, Eric, I think that we need to start by saying that Dr. A is a different kind of professor. So I don't
Yeah, you're the
follow.
cool prof, right?
Yeah.
Your LinkedIn handle is the
Yeah.
cool prof. So I wanted you to prove that you were the cool prof rather than me just saying that you're the cool prof.
I'm definitely the cool prof. We're going to definitely get there. So this
Says
is
who? Who says you're the cool prof? You said it or your students said it?
the students say. So the students are they are the voice of the professors, right? What we say carries very little value, but what your kids say carries a lot of value. So I'm the guy that goes on campus and skateboards on campus and goes out and have conversations with the kids who do some creative work in media production on campus. We're producing films and producing different types of artifacts for media production and delivery. So that has resulted in my kids saying that, Dr. A, you are the cool prof, you're the cool professor. So then I changed my handle in my social media to reflect that. But to answer your question, man, the reason why I change jobs so much is that, quite frankly, I have this desire to work with different kinds of people. When I was in PA, when I got tenure for Indiana University of Pennsylvania, and I sat down in my house, I remember it was yesterday, and I felt, man, is that it? Is that all that is? I'm tenure, promoted, and associate professor. Back then, I was serving as a department chair of another division, which is interesting in itself, as being a vice chair of my own department. And I spoke with my wife, and I said, no, maybe we should move south. Let's work with different types of students and having some fun there. So that's when I decided to come to the South. And I said, well, I've been working in rural Pennsylvania for about 7 years. And I felt, well, how cool would it be to go to inner city Jackson in Mississippi, and then end up getting a job at Jackson State and stay there for a few years. And then there was the Trump effect. And I don't know exactly what would have done to the industry, to the HBCUs, and end up going to another private school, and very driven in production. And I went there because I ended up looking at the description of one of the faculty members, which now is a close ally of mine. He used to work, but still works. He used to work at the university and still works with Spielberg at Skywalker Studios in California. And I said, well, how cool would it be to maybe go there and produce some cool productions, which we did. Some of them that maybe got the most attention was the work that was done with the state of Tennessee, with the Bradley County Health Council, to promote healthy living and using social to scale the message, which was really cool, which led to me working with students on campus on creating. I was one of the advisors to create the Black Student Union on campus, and I was helping the kids who had been pushed to the side a lot, which is why I came to the South. And then staying there for a little bit, I felt I have to go back to an HBCU. So I went to Talladega, and in there, I kind of redid the whole department. The university's communication department was literally, there was nothing. So I did a lot of work there. And then a few years back, we were ranked by the PR News as a top department nationwide for students pursuing careers in PR and communication. I was really happy about that. And then an opportunity came to come here to South Carolina, where my wife is technically from. And I felt, well, I kind of have to go that one. And they gave me a good package, and I came. But my heart is in minority
So
education.
you're the cool professor, Dr. A. I can call you
Mhm.
Dr. A. That's easy.
Yeah,
You've seen the whole pandemic change higher education, and the
sure.
landscape is really it's shifting a little bit, right? How much
Yeah,
money can kids afford to go to schools? How much is it worth it? The value of maybe just having a trade or going to vocational
yeah.
school or going to a direct, industry training type of program costs less. You get out sooner, you start making more money right away without having all this debt. Are you seeing almost a permanent shift here? Because you've worked at many universities and you're seeing students across the socioeconomic landscape, right? Minority kids or not, like you see the full spectrum of diversity. Are colleges in a way mispricing their value right now?
That is a very good question. Eric, one of the things that I like to say on this is that, of course, I guess there is this boom of, I shouldn't say boom, but there is this bubble called the higher education bubble, that the prices of colleges and universities raised at a much higher rate than the cost of inflation over the years. There is no doubt about it. But often, what I also like to point out is that some of this debt is not always related to the university. So I don't know about when you were in school, you went to the MIT, right?
Yeah, that's right. I graduated in 2005. So I started in '01. So 20 years ago, I was a student. 20 years ago, I was in college. Yeah.
Well, we kind of graduated in a similar, and almost in a similar time frame. And I don't know about you guys at the MIT, but when I was at Penn State, I didn't have all the bells and whistles that most folks would have today. So if you think about extra accounts to buy cell phones and all those extra investments that students sometimes make that can cost, they make the education very expensive. No doubt that I was talking with my wife about this. Funny you asked the question. That to pursue an MBA in a top 10 schools right now, tuition every year is about 60 plus thousand
It's all
dollars.
the trips, it's all that travel they get you on, right? It's not the tuition, the parties.
Well, at the undergraduate level, it is absolutely so. Start putting the price of the extras, and then of course it gets very expensive. So sure, tuition has increased to much higher levels than inflation, but also the lifestyle of our students have also changed. I saw this phenomenon, Eric, in multiple institutions in this country, which can cause, this is alarming to me, can cause several problems in the long run, especially because student debt is, up to today, is a debt that cannot be accounted. Bankruptcy doesn't take that into account, right? They have to pay that back.
So in the communications field, your students are most likely going to end up where? Or what's their first job right out of school? And let's say, where are they 5 or 10 years out of school?
One of the reasons I came here to Claflin was to make this the biggest statement. And when I tell them the same thing that I told in other institutions, since I left PA, this has been almost like a stamp of my advice for you asking, is that their jobs, Eric, are going to go to social, they're going to go to strategic home, where they're going to be able to be creative and show a little bit of their humanity in this technological world and be able to be creative and produce content to advance a brand. So we have enough folks who can take photographs. We have enough folks, we have enough students who can write. We have a lot of students who can speak in public, but we don't have as many students who can strategize a campaign and deliver that campaign in addition to everything else. So the jobs are a lot there. I have placed so many students in multiple industries in this area, and that's what I tell them. There is value in understanding radio, um, so the concepts of radio and announcing and so on. And well, maybe you're gonna have a future producing a podcast, like Politely Push is an example of this. Or you're gonna go out and you're gonna be producing content. You're gonna be this guy who's gonna be a creative for, I don't know, a university or a company where you're gonna be producing micro content at scale for Instagram or whatever the case. So I tell them the jobs in production, in media production for the new media, in social in particular, where we are there. I don't think we're going to be going away from that anytime soon.
Communications as a field for you, it's almost like a meta question, right? Like you're communicating to your students to go
Yes.
get jobs to communicate to the public. hybrid, remote,
Yeah.
right? Working on Zoom. We're doing this podcast digitally. We're not even in the same state, right?
Mhm.
How are you seeing all of this changing both on the education side and then on the work side? So, like BoSpar is a fully remote company, right? Like there's no
Yes.
office here, but you're on a campus that has real buildings and dorms and people go to class. Maybe they don't go to class all the time because it's a hybrid or Zoom. Where do you think is the sweet spot for learning? Because I think we saw a lot of kids, and I say kids, they're adults, right? A lot of students struggled with learning remotely, right? They struggled when it wasn't in a classroom, but a lot of these jobs now, they're not in an office. So there's a big transition from school to work. How do you deal with that? How do you help your students adjust? And what do you think is the right balance?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you also asked that question because this is a major trend in higher education. And the way of how we handle this right now, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we had to, as an institution, we had to adjust to the demands of the market and indeed offer those classes in at first over the internet through distance education, and then we went to a hybrid format, which to me I feel privileged, I guess, in this area because my doctoral degree in my a lot of my research deals with elements of distance education, so I have been prepared for that crisis for COVID-19 before it happened. But at the industry overall, the way to handle this, and I'm a firm believer of that we don't live in 20 in even the year 2000s anymore. We are way beyond the 90s and the 80s or any decade before that. Technology is here to stay. So the responsibility of the modern faculty member, the modern professor, at least in my opinion, in communications, both, is to be able to understand how the tools of the media can be conveyed online. So, for example, if you're training someone, and I stand by that, Eric, if somebody is learning how to edit a photograph, for example, so that we can produce a small piece of micro content for a campaign, I don't know, for Coca-Cola. Why do I need to have a student in my class if I can literally share my screen with him or her and show them precisely what they have to do to be able to make that image better? And not only that, now we have tools of artificial intelligence that reduces the time exponentially to be able to do that. So for students, and I guess to answer your question more fully, for students who don't feel prepared to take a class online, and sometimes this is because the kids may come from a training in high school that was not strong enough to for them to learn how to manage their time a little better. Maybe they should come to college and at least learn a little bit on a face-to-face format so that they can maybe develop those skill sets and maybe save some funding and save some of the tuition, not tuition, but save um, some of the board funds and maybe go to their households if they wish to later on to save some money. I, I, I'm a biased one to ask that question because I've seen work, you
I,
know.
I, I like that you brought up the economic side because I was going to ask you economically right now, maybe there's a recession. Getting certain types of jobs is a little tougher right now as opposed to maybe last year, a couple of years ago, or before the pandemic. Are you seeing students more likely to drop out because actually there's good opportunities or because they need to work to support their family? Or if anything, because maybe the right job isn't there for them, they're more likely to be students? What are you seeing in terms of that, I'd say, dropout factor, right? Is there more, in a way, like, is the recession, the fear of a recession actually causing people to go quit school to work, or is it causing them to get into school for stability?
I've seen the second more than the first. In our industry has been known for that. When jobs are not there and when things don't work out well, they often come to college to try to solve the problem. My kids have felt, on the other hand, have felt the impact or the impacts of this pandemic, and which caused, especially for people of color, has been very difficult in so many respects. But overall, we often see an increase in enrollment when the hope is decreasing outside in the so-called real world. I'm hoping that as long as we provide a curriculum that is in alignment with the marketplace, which is one of the biggest challenges that higher education, the parts of communication and mass communications right now have is to revise their curriculum to offer classes and skill sets that are in alignment in practice, that is in alignment with the workforce. They will come, and for sure the industry is gonna strive.
You mentioned students of color, minorities. You're at a historically Black university, and you've worked at colleges haven't been, right. So you've seen multiple, types of schools that you've worked at. There's been a push in corporate America to hire more diverse candidates, right? To have more diverse employees. Are you seeing that trickle down to the recent college graduates? Are you seeing the benefit coming to your students, or is it not really working out that way in the marketplace?
No, it's no. This definitely trickles down to our industry, no doubt about it. My communication with uh, agencies and even with BOSPAR had a conversation already with the possibility of having one of our kids, which is really talented. She's getting now an internship. She got an award in LA with the NBCU Universal, and this push for bringing more diversity into the workforce is for real. So the companies, the TV stations, they reach out to me and ask, well, do you have a very good student who's interested in doing a career, as being a news producer, anybody who's a great writer? So the communication has been much more open now, that some of us, some of the industries, some of us in activists are high on this. It's high on our priority to have a more diverse workforce. So now, yeah, I can see the communication being open two ways with industry and higher ed.
Is there a conversation among students about broader life, maybe not about work? We're seeing different decisions, let's say from the Supreme Court, or gun violence and school shootings and war in Ukraine. Are there conversations that your students have with you about what the real world looks like, or what they might be afraid of going into the future? Or is it really just more about, hey, I'm trying to study, get my grades, and get a job and get out of here?
Well, in HBCUs, part of HBCUs, I think is ingrained in our DNA that we look for the issues of social justice. So it's not atypical for an HBCU to be vocal about some of the events that happen in society. So uh, I have had many conversations with students in our department about the importance of what we call police reform and creating campaigns that handle that, and the lack of intergroup communication that may exist between what we call white officers and non-white officers. We have spoken heavily about this, and difficulties of the workforce. In multiple occasions, the kids come to my office and we talk about real life scenarios, and I'm a Hispanic Latino professor, so they also look at my perspective and a better understanding of how the world may be out there. So those conversations, that kind of intertwine. We watch clips relating to the issue in a classroom to be able to have those conversations. Absolutely.
What does the industry need to do to better get ready for the next generation of workers, right? You're always hearing about, oh, it was millennials, then it was Gen Y, Gen Z. I'm losing track of letters. I don't know what comes after Z. Maybe they start back at A again, but with this brand new, class of 2022, which means they're probably born in 2000, right? Which is crazy.
Crazy.
That's crazy, right? What does the industry need to do to adjust to welcome this brand new employee that has probably a lot of technical skills and artistic skills and social media skills that the older employees don't have?
Well, to answer your question, one of the ways that the workforce may want to consider adapting is to understand that, number one, this generation is different. They are much more relatable. They want to communicate a little more, just because they were born and raised with all the technology, and with that, they have they have been using mediated communication for many years, but they lack a little bit of this conversation one-on-one. So relational communication is key there. And for some of us who are innovators and we use technology in our daily lives and we make a living out of it, Sure, maybe we have been the early adopters of the past, but we also knew the differences between the machine and machine communication, human computer interaction, and interpersonal communication, maybe in a different level. We could disconnect. We didn't have to be on a computer all the time. Where this new generation, the Gen Z generation, they didn't have that. So that relationship has to exist. It's what I tell companies when they call and they say, "Well, what is some of the strengths and weaknesses of your students?" And I say, "Well, it's not necessarily this is a weakness, but the kids they are a different generation of kids who have not had much of communication interpersonally and conflict resolution outside of media, and they are, no matter if they are uh, African Americans or non-African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, it doesn't matter. For what I have seen, it's and observed, the kids are relational. So industry may want to take that into account, because when we enable the kids to do the work and they believe that they can do it, they do it. They do a great job. And so if I were to give an advice for companies, that it will be to be more relational with their students, with their employees. I'm sorry.
We always hear about STEM, right? STEM, science, tech, engineering, math. Communications by stereotype feels like the exact opposite of that, right? It feels like, oh, that's writing and talking. That's not STEM, but there's so much technology involved. So do you find that the students are different than the STEM students? You find that there's this push and pull. Okay, do I want to do STEM? Because apparently those are the better jobs. Everyone's pushing me to do a STEM job, but communications feels a little too easy, even though there's tech there. How do you walk through those two worlds that I think by stereotype feel very far removed from each other?
Well, this is interesting conversation, because communication singular is often rooted in the humanities, because we're talking about argumentation, you're talking about interpersonal communication, the cultural communication, you're looking at mostly qualitative discourse and so on, where communications or mass communications, plural, is often rooted in the social sciences. So then we're looking for experimentation, looking for data and testing a hypothesis, and trying to generalize the results to the wider population. So we need to be clear that there is a distinction there. As being a as being a student of mathematics, I know communications professor who love mathematics. That's me. But I see what you're saying. There is a little bit of this until folks come to our major and understand that to be able to edit audio is apply acoustics. You have to understand how to understand the the megahertz of you have to understand the audio waves of nature. This is a high scientific area. If you look at photography and optics, this is also highly mathematical in understanding. Now in social, we're talking about data-driven decision making. Well, now we have to look a little bit in numbers. So we're starting to attract more students in the sciences as minors exactly because of that. And once you combine that with the creative side of communications, then we have a home run. And but that's my answer to that. Now, institutions of higher learning, because of the perception that the hard sciences will give you a higher salary, often attract the students in. But as they come to the institution, to the universities, not all students stay in the hard sciences, and the more creative hard science applicants end up coming to mass communication to be the producers, to be the brains and the strategies of the social sciences. Very interesting phenomenon.
Do you see a push to maybe doing communications work, but for tech companies or science companies, right? Because there's all these, education tech, right? Education, as you know, is a pretty recession-proof business. Health technology, medical technology, they all still need communications professionals. Do you find that there's this place where that's an intersection that's interesting for students to find their career?
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the areas that we talk at Cleveland. Mostly my office is that, well, just realize, folks, that the skill sets that you're learning, sure, that there are skill sets that can certainly apply to the media industry, but the field is so much bigger. Like instructional communication is a huge gig. You see, so being able to work for Coca-Cola and use media to train others, that's an area. So if we think about the development of training programs in itself for or serving as a consultant for McKinley or KPMG over time, and being the person who's going to produce those trainings using media and understanding how media is used to communicate a message is also a career path. So we talk about the field of mass communications in a very broadly context, which helps the students to understand that this is a field that is intriguing because as things change, we kind of adapt to the needs of the market. So absolutely, that is also a conversation that we talk about it so kids can understand the larger scope.
You say adapting to the market, and I think about cloud platforms, data analytics, data technology, cybersecurity. All of this is important now at the educational level, the corporate level, mass communications level. If you get it wrong, you've got a big PR nightmare on your hands. And obviously, to produce a lot of this work, you need to work with these skills. How much of the technology, the super high tech stuff that's now come in over the last 10 years has changed the way you're teaching and changing the skill set necessary for what your students need to have as they go into the workplace?
Well, it has been drastic because the adoption of the automated insights technology with the Associated Press has really kind of redesigned the way of how message is created for the media. And the use of artificial intelligence tools as almost like a replacement of the creator is pretty scary for an educator who is training students to become that person. The tools right now, when I think about the tools of production and thinking about even the Topaz AI tools for photo editing production and taking noise out of photographs to be used in magazines, something that would take us hours to do in Photoshop can be done in a few seconds through AI technology. So it has changed quite drastically. But what I tell the students is that you have to understand that AI technology is going to be here to stay. We're not going to go backwards. So those tools, then, the way how the training is changed is now those tools are part of your workflow. So then by understanding that you can produce that kind of work maybe a little quicker, you're going to have a little more time to produce maybe some of your other creative work and create a system that allows you to be able to be that employee, or if you have the desire to be an entrepreneur, to be that employer who's going to be the innovative and be able to do more than one job at a time, yet mastering the tools of production and being like on demand. And the majority of our students who have been succeeding after Claflin, without exception, understood that when I spoke with them, that the future of the media is multimedia. We have to be able to apply those different tools, almost like an artist has different types of paints and brushes. We have different types of media tools that allows us to produce content.
That's right. There's no escaping AI, even in mass communications, working on Photoshop. It's there no matter where you go, and it's not going away. Dr. A, Professor Luis Almeida, fascinating conversation. I appreciate the time today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you to my guest, and thanks for listening. Subscribe to get the latest episodes each week, and we'll see you next time.